the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commands and commands us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. All right, so I hope everyone had a pretty good week, and no one got frostbite or anything like that. So here we are today, and looks it was pretty warm today too, wasn't it, down here in South Texas? All right, we are in the Gideon. I was just reading about Abimelech. We're in the Gideon section right here, and right in smack in the middle of some battles. So I thought that's kind of an interesting stuff to read about, and some interesting things that come out of that. All right, so here we are in this timeline here. All right, and there's some overlap between Deborah and Gideon, as you can see. All right, then we get down to this other timeline that I call that the headache timeline, because it gives me a headache trying to figure it out, but it is pretty detailed and kind of cool. Then Jerubbaal, or if you're from East Texas, Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the people who were with him rose up early and encamped beside Ein Harod, while the camp of Midian was north of them by Gibeath Moreh in the valley. But Adonai said to Gideon, "Too many are the people who are with you for me to give the Midianites into their hand. Otherwise, Israel would glorify itself against me, saying, 'Mine own hand has delivered me.' So now make a proclamation in the ears of the people, saying, 'Whoever is afraid or anxious may turn back and leave from Mount Gilead.'" And so 22,000 people turned back, while 10,000 remained. So they had a slew. They had 32,000 people lined up to come against Midian, and even then they were outnumbered. We find out in the next chapter that there were over 100,000 Midianites that had moved into Israel to fight against Israel, and just to spoil Israel and take everything that they had. So this, even though they had 32,000, they were still outnumbered at least 3-1. And so then it's interesting that this double use of Gideon's name, the Jerubbaal, and his name Gideon, possibly is, in the writer's mind, might have been a kind of a hint of another victory coming up. This, of course, his first victory was the tearing down the altar to Baal that actually belonged to his father, or his father was the caretaker of, or anything like that. And so that's where he got his name, Yerub-Baal, which means contended with Baal, or let Baal contend with Gideon. I mean, we talked about there's quite a few ways of kind of interpreting this thing. So now he's got the two names, and so it's kind of quite a rise from this guy that's hiding in a wine press and threshing grain to being able to muster out 32,000 men. Now, the only way that you could attribute that, because Gideon was, not before this, he was not known as a charismatic leader or a mighty warrior or something like that. But he was able to gather up 32,000 people. That's quite a victory in itself. But God said, "Okay, now I want to reduce this number because I know you guys, and if you go out there and you beat Midian, you're gonna, puff your chest out and say, we won against Midian, and leave God out of it. So he said, all right, so we'll just get rid of everybody, or get rid of a lot of people, and then that way it would have to be if there was victory, then it would be a miraculous victory. So he said, anybody that is afraid or anxious or whatever, you just don't want to go and fight, you can turn around and leave from Mount Gilead. And I think this is maybe, they say Mount Gilead, but the only place that there's a Gilead is over on the east side of the Jordan. So it's probably the only other mountain that kind of fits in there is not Gilead, it's Gilboa. And so similar in the Hebrew. So anyway, that's probably what it was. But it's kind of interesting now that what we see with Gideon is that he said, whoever is afraid or anxious. Now, so that Gideon is now going to have to try to figure out, okay, he's got to make a decision, because when he put his hand to all of this, and the angel came to him and said, "Oh, mighty man of valor," and he turned around and says, "Hey, you talking to me?" He was not known as he was afraid. Here he was in the wine press trying to thresh some grain because he was afraid of the Midianites. And so now he's got to either identify himself with those that are afraid, or just step up to the plate and say, okay, here I am. I'm going to stay with what the Lord told me to do, which, fortunately, that's what he ended up doing. So he ended up with still 10,000 men. Now, I found an interesting picture. Now, this picture was taken of the Ein Harod, the spring, where the Gideon spring, where they're talking about, in 1896. And these fellows here are actually posing for the camera in the pose that the warriors would have done. These guys down here in the water drinking from it, and I got a picture of me doing the very same thing at the spring, but I can't find it. I don't know what happened to that particular file of photos. So I'm missing a whole file of my Israeli photos someplace in the archives. So I gotta have to find that one of these days. But these guys are doing what the soldiers did. But this guy over here, nope, he's not gonna fight. He's gonna lap up the water, stick his face in the water, and drink it that way. So I just thought that was kind of interesting that there's that much water around here, because look at this. Okay, here's the spring today. This is what it is, still flowing with water. There is still a little bit of water in it, but not much. And so when we were there, I looked down there, and there's these tiny little, I'd say tiny, maybe, this big around, with all of their legs and everything, these little bugs that would just scoot across the top of the water. They just scoot everywhere. And so when I went down to the spring there and scooped my hand down into the water to drink the water, a lot of the people in the tour group, they were just really terrified that I would drink water, that these bugs are floating around, or not floating, they're just scurrying around all over the place on top of it. And our guide, who was a retired lieutenant colonel, paratrooper with the Israeli army, he looked over at me and he says, you're drinking from water that's got bugs on it. And I said, yeah, I know. And he looked over at the other people and said, he knows if there's bugs on that water like that, those kind of bugs and skittering around on the water, that means the water is perfectly safe to drink. He said, if there were no bugs here, or you looked around and you didn't see anything on or in the water, then you don't drink it because it wouldn't be safe. So I went ahead and drank some water from the Gideon spring and had people to take my picture that now I've lost, and and so um, we went ahead and did all of that. It was kind of cool anyway. Plus, I walked into the water with my little sandals on, and it was nice and cool, and it was a warm day, so I got to cool off a little bit. All right, so going on, just as an aside, Rabbi Trail here, the water all throughout Israel, the surface water, the groundwater, and the springs and so forth are siphoned off and used up for agriculture. And you see a lot of like over in Gedi, where David used to hide from King Saul. It's down toward the Dead Sea, about 10 miles from Masada. That spring, that waterfall there is really just a trickle. I mean, what they do is they allow enough water to go through it so that you do have a little waterfall, you do have a little pond at the bottom of it, and you can and then from there the water cascades down into another little pool, and you can actually get into that pool and kind of splash around. You can't swim in it because it's not deep enough or big enough, but you can still do that. But all up the river of that feeds in Gedi, they've taken out water for municipalities and for agriculture. So there's always a battle for water in Israel, and that's one of the reasons that Israel has they have invented so much. Well, they've got the best water filtration, water desalinization equipment and technology in the world. No one can best the Israelis for their water desalinization technology. And then they're also the ones that invented drip irrigation that has become really very, very prolific around the world for saving water and providing water just where you need it. So anyway, that was a Rabbi Trail. We'll get back to our reading here in verse 4. Anybody got anything to add about that from my very interesting Rabbi Trail? Okay. Judges 7:4-6. But Adonai said to Gideon, the people are still too many. Bring them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. Now it will be that he of whom I say to you, this will go with you, and he will go with you. But anyone whom I say to you, this one will not go with you, he will not go. So in other words, God is telling them, all right, I'm going to go make the choices down here, and I don't want to hear anything out of you as to about who I'm choosing. Verse 5, it says, so he brought the troops down to the water, and Adonai said to Gideon, you are to set apart everyone who laps the water with his tongue as a dog laps, and everyone who bows down on his knee to drink. Now the number of those who lapped, putting their hands to their mouth, was 300 men, but to all the rest of the people bowed down on their knees to drink water. All right, and I'm behind on my slide. All right, there it is. So there was this further reduction of the troops from 10,000 back down to 300. But with this, again, there will be a promise of victory and the test. Now, the Hebrew in here is a little bit confusing because it says that those who lap the water like a dog. Now, if it was, if I was describing that as to how how would you lap water like a dog? I would think that that's the guy that goes down on his hands and knees, puts his face down there in the water, and sucks it up somehow. Um, but no, that's not what it said. It's those that lap from the water, meaning that you get down and pick up the water in your hands, and then you drink it out of your hands. While the other ones, they just go and stick their face down in the water and suck it up that way. So God is saying that everyone who reaches down with their hand and brings the water up to their mouth and drinks, those are the ones I want. Well, only 300 of them did that out of 10,000. So that's what, 3%, something like that. The less than that, 1/10 of, or somebody that's better at math. That's anyway. It's just a little bit of it. I should have figured that out before I started the class and said something and embarrassed myself, shouldn't I? All right. So God had already dismissed 2/3 of his army, going down from 32,000 down to 10,000. Now he says, okay, we're going to get rid of even more than that, and we're going to get down to 300 men. And so there I got the scoopers, the guy that scoop up the water and lap it up. They're the ones that stuck around. Now, in verse 7 there said, and then Gideon, and then Adonai said to Gideon, with the 300 who have lapped, I will deliver you and give the Midianites into your hand. So let all the other people go, every man to his place. And so the 300 took provisions and their shofarot, that means their shofars, in their hand, and went all and sent all the other men of Israel, each to his tent, but he kept the 300 men. Now the camp of Midian was below him in the valley. All right, now in this thing that we're talking about, I talked about it before. God had given Gideon the promise of a victory. And so this was really an incredible test of Gideon's faith. To go from 32,000, which he was outnumbered 3-1, because they had over 100,000 troops with Midian. And then God says, no, that's too many. And he took away 2/3 of his army and only left him with 10,000. So here he is outnumbered then over 10-1. And so then, we get down to the 300 against over 100,000 of the Midianites. So, that would be kind of a nightmare just waiting to happen. So, and then it's noted that he sent all the other men of Israel, each to his tent. That meant to me, after studying this thing, now I'd always figured that, okay, he just sent everybody home. Well, no, they just put them back, and he says, you guys are not going to fight this battle. You're going to be in the wings. You're going to be waiting, and I'm going to do it with 300 men. Now, they were up on this Mount Gilboa, and Midian was down further in the valley. So they had left the spring there, Ein Harod, and gone up into the mountain as a defensive maneuver. And Midian had noticed that these guys were all getting together, so they amassed all of their people down in the valley, where generally they would try to bring the Israelites into battle in a valley, so that they could be overwhelmed. Whereas if they tried to climb up in the mountains to pursue Israel, then they could use kind of like guerrilla warfare against them. Be a little bit tougher. So anyway, that's where we're at now. So he said that so take 300 of you, get your provisions, and in other words, just put together a knapsack and get yourself a picnic lunch, because we're going to be traveling a little bit. And he gave them, he said, put a shofar in their hands, and everybody else went into the reserve camp. And so going on then, the next, that it came to pass that in the same night that Adonai said to him, arise, get down against the camp, for I have given it to your hand. But if you're afraid to go, first go down to the camp with your attendant Purah. Then you will hear what they're saying, and after that your hands will be strengthened to attack the camp. So he went down with his attendant Purah to an outpost of the army that was in camp. All right, so here we have, again, God's promised Gideon the victory, but it's quite evident that Gideon was he was having some serious doubts and fears, and he was just not at all, the confident guy that we would think he would be. And so God says, look, if you're doubting me, if you got some fears or something, take your adjutant there, and you guys sneak down there and listen to what they're saying. Which, it's just, to me, the story is kind of incredible. Anyway, so they snuck down there. Okay, what's the right word? Is that they snuck down there? I just haven't looked down there because that's the way I talk. They snuck down there, or they sneaked down there, or maybe they stealthily maneuvered into position, something like that. But they went down to the Midianites down there and spied on them at this outpost, and that sentence that line there really doesn't make much sense. But now that I look at it, had too many thoughts going on at one time. So anyway, that's what he and Gideon and Purah did. They in the cover of darkness, they went down there very stealthily, and they came up on an outpost of the Midianite army. And so at that point, then we get to the next verses 12 here. Now the Midianites, the Amalekites, and all the people of the east were lying in the valley as numerous as locusts, and their camels were countless, as numerous as the sand on the seashore. Yet when Gideon came, behold, there was a man relating a dream to his fellows, saying, listen, I just now had a dream. Now, if they were on an outpost, why in the world was he sleeping and having a dream? But that's another story. And he said, there was a loaf of barley bread that came tumbling into the camp of Midian, came up to a tent and struck it so it fell, and turned it upside down so that the tent lay flat. His companion answered and said, there is nothing less than the sword of Gideon. This is nothing less than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, a man of Israel. God has delivered Midian and all the camp into his hands. Now, one of my initial thoughts on this idea of a loaf of bread coming down and smashing a tent was that I've tried my hand at baking a few times, and I've definitely baked a few loaves of bread that could have smashed a tent. That's for sure. But there's several things here that are kind of interesting. They said they went into the valley. People were as numerous as locusts, and their camels were countless, as numerous as the sand on the seashore. So I know you're not supposed to say this, but can you take the Bible literally? Yeah, hyperbole. And the Bible is full of hyperbole, because that was the way that the Middle Eastern people at the time they spoke in those kind of terms. Is that everything that they spoke of, in their literature and so forth, it was over the top. It was excessive. If they had the victory, then it was an excessive victory against uncountable odds and so on and so forth. and then they would describe the victory over the vanquished, and how how big a deal that was. So that was just the way that they spoke back then, and we still do the same thing today. I say it all the time that people will say, "Yeah, we had a party and everybody was there." Well, what does that mean? Everybody who? Um, and so, same here. This is Midianites, Amalekites, and all the people of the east. Well, who are all the people of the east? That's a bunch of folks there. If you counted out, how far to the east did you want to go? Because you headed on over toward India and China. Wow, that would have been a bunch of folks. But no, that was not what they're talking about. It was just a bunch of people, and it was kind of what they call hyperbole. And so a lot of times in the Bible, that it is hyperbole, and especially when you're talking about something that is numerous as locusts, countless as the sand on the seashore, and many as the stars in the sky, and that sort of thing. The meaning is it's a number that you cannot count. So, and then you get down there, and Gideon comes along, and up onto a command or an outpost there, and he's listening to these two guys talking. And just as the time that Gideon gets up there, this guy tells his buddy that he had a dream, and this loaf of bread, barley bread, came tumbling into camp, smashed up his tent, and so forth. So that to me is incredible that they get down there into position. They sneak up on the guy, and what's the guy doing? He's talking to his buddy about a dream, and then the other one agrees and said, "Yeah, this can only mean that Gideon is going to beat Midianites, and that God is certainly with Gideon instead of with Midian." All right, so at that point, then God had put these little things together just so that Gideon would hear them and it would strengthen his resolve. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And so another thing was that he's comparing this loaf of bread to something that would beat Israel, and Israel certainly did not have a formidable army at this point compared to, even if all their 32,000 had stayed there, it would have been only, they would have been outnumbered 3-1 anyway. So just interesting stuff, I thought. All right, now going ahead. Now when let's see, where am I at? Now when Gideon heard the account of the dream and its interpretation, he bowed in worship. Then he returned to the camp of Israel and said, "Arise, for Adonai has given into your hand the camp of Midian." Then he divided the 300 into 3 columns and put into the hands of all of them shofars and empty pitchers with torches inside the pitchers. Then he said to them, "Watch me and do likewise." So behold, when I come to the outskirts of the camp, just do as I do. When I and all that are with me blow the shofar, then you also blow the shofar in all around the camp, and say, "For Adonai and for Gideon." And so, again, there's some when Gideon heard this Midianite dream, then it was all over for him. That was no more doubts, no more fears, and he could it was just awestruck. He bowed his head in worship that God would provide this little bit of information for him right away. And so that's when he went went back to the camp and told them, okay, everybody get up, get out of bed. We're going to go, and because God has given us the camp. And so then they divided up into 3 columns, and they gave them all shofars and empty pitchers with torches inside the pitchers. All right, now, I've always had some questions on this kind of stuff here as to, okay, number one, where did they come up with 300 shofars? That's a shofar is not something really that people would be carrying around. A few people might, but I don't think that was something that people normally carried with them. And then 300 pitchers. Okay, I need he couldn't go down to Ace Hardware and pick up 300 pitchers of just empty clay pot. And so looking at some archaeology sites, this was what they'd come up with as the kind of pitcher, because the normal, like the water pitchers and so forth of the day would have been much larger than something like this. And that is a sheet of, it's either A4, it looks like A4 rather than 8.5 by 11 American size. But you can kind of see what the thing is, maybe 12 inches tall and about 8 inches in diameter. And so they would put a torch in there. Now, I don't know how you could put a torch in there and have it stay lit without going out, using up all the oxygen in it or something like that. But that's what they did. So I looked it up, trying to find some way of, okay, how did that work? Because did they all of them have a little coal in the bottom of that, a coal of fire in the bottom of their pitcher, or how did that really work? I don't know. Anybody have any of your readings or anything like that? Have you ever come up with an explanation for that? Help me out here. Anybody?
No, sir.
All right. Okay, Cynthia says, who's to say it was closed off on the end? It was just but even if it was closed off on one end, just one end, an empty pitcher.
What am I, Bible?
Okay, Cynthia said, well, why didn't they just had a tube up around the torch? Well, again, it would have had to have been constructed, I guess, because that wouldn't be a normal accoutrement. Go ahead.
The cultural Bible almost makes it sound like a Molotov, probably sticks with rags soaked in oil and wrapped around their ends, or since it was harvest, reeds or stalks of grain tightly bound and attached to short sticks. Yeah, but then where that I can visualize the torch actually, but what I can't figure out is how in the world did they keep it lit up inside this pitcher, and unless they could we don't know the exact time frame. Was this immediately where did they have enough time to get some guys together and make some pots? Because if you ever been to Israel, there are clay pot shards everywhere. I mean, just everywhere there's clay pot shards. They don't care if you take a pocket full of them. In fact, they encourage you to do so that they don't have so many rocks in the place where they're trying to grow stuff. So I don't know. They said so long as the lit torches were covered by the jars, they would smolder. But once the jars were removed, they would fan into flame. Yeah. But like you said, the time frame would be really relevant. How long would they smolder without any oxygen? Well, that not only that, but then okay, how did that work? And I couldn't find anybody that would really give me a good definitive answer. Rabbi Google was just not working today. So, but anyway, that this archaeological site said that this was possibly the kind of picture. It would have been something a man could handle in his hand and still like put a torch or something in there. So, Reba, do you have something? No. All righty then. Well, then we will go on to verse 19. So Gideon and the 300 men who were with him came up to the outermost parts of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, when they had just posted the watch. Then they blew the shofarot and smashed the pitchers that were in their hands. When the three columns blew the shofarot and broke the pitchers, they held the torches in their left hand and the shofarot in their right hand to blow, and they shouted, a sword for Adonai and for Gideon. Each one stood in his place around the camp, and then the entire army ran, shouting as they fled. So what they're talking about now, the army of Midian. So, all right, let's go ahead with here's a little picture of where they had gotten together, and let me go round round number one over here. It says Midianite camel raiders established themselves in Israel and began pillaging. Okay, that began pillaging. They've been doing this for 8 years. So this was just that they would make an offensive. They would go in and just at the grain harvest or the barley harvest or the grape harvest, wherever there was a harvest, then that's when they would make these raids. And so then Gideon then calls over here number 2. Gideon emerges as a judge and calls for men to fight the raiders while dealing with internal religious problems. About 30,000 tribesmen, it's 32,000, respond to Gideon's call and meet up here at Ophrah. All right, and then Gideon convenes the Israelite council at the spring of Herod. And he chose 10,000 men for his field army and 300 for an elite force to confront the Midianites. Okay, well that's I guess that's a good way of saying it. But he did keep those troops in reserve. They were held from the initial onslaught into the Midianite camp. Then we go up here to says that Gideon then leads a small elite force behind the enemy camp and makes a noisy demonstration and attack, accompanied by trumpets and torches. And thinking that they were under a heavy assault, the sleepy Midianites panic and began fighting one another in the chaos. Their army disintegrates and they begin to flee. And then the Midianites are chased headlong into the rest of Gideon's army. Thousands of battle-ready Israelite warriors fell on the scattered and panicked Midianites and massacred them. All right, so what we see here is the shofars, the shofarot, and the torches were what we would call a force multiplier. And what that means is that they had some way of doing something that would make their army much more effective than it normally would, just given their numbers. 300 people. How are 300 people going to defeat 100,000 Midianites? So so they were a force multiplier. Well, how so? Well, the shofar was used as a signaling device in battle. So you would figure that within battle, you're going to have a shofar perhaps for maybe, I'm just taking a guess here. If you had a shofar for every 100 people, all right, and so you wouldn't have you just have just a few buglers or shofar players in the large army. It's like back when in our earlier days as a nation, that's the way they communicated. The field, the armies, they would have a shofar. I mean, shofar. They would have a bugler, and they would have flags and so forth. But the bugler would blow certain sounds, and people would know whether or not they whether or not they were to charge, whether they were to retreat, or whatever it is that they were going to do, because they could hear that bugle, they'd know what they had to do. So if the army down, the Israeli army, the Israelite army there, if they had 300 shofars, well, if you had just like one shofar for every 100 men, which is a company in today's terms, a company of men, then that probably wouldn't have been too many shofars to blow for 100 guys to hear and so forth. So that could have that could have meant maybe an army of 30,000 or so. Well, still 30,000 is not a whole lot compared to, I mean, compared to the 100,000 that the Midianites had. So, and the torches kind of had the same effect. That was just one of those things that people look out there, and all of a sudden there's like a whole bunch of little lights coming down the mountain toward them, not really knowing what in the world is that. Why, to attack an army at night is something that just wasn't done normally. And they did it right at the changing of the guard, so that the guys that would have been on watch, they'd already gone back. They're already tired. They'd gone to bed. They're probably sound asleep. The other ones were sleeping through the night or whatever. But the guards that were on post, maybe they hadn't, they'd just gotten away from the campfire, and their eyes still weren't adjusted, so they weren't ready for battle. So anyway, that it was a good time for them to attack the Midianites. All right, and going on down to 7:22, this is now when they blew the 300 shofarot. Adonai set every man's sword against his fellow throughout the entire army. So the army fled as far as Beth Shittah toward Zerara, as far as the border of El Meholah by Tabath. Then men of Israel were summoned from Naphtali, Asher, and all Manasseh, and they pursued Midian. All right. So the Midianites, you got to remember that this was not a well-disciplined, cohesive, permanent standing army that practiced, and they had drills and so forth. No, these were like marauders, raiders, or something. That they would gather together a bunch of guys, and then they'd go swooping down into Israel and stealing everything that they could. But they would get together for this, the spring offensive, or the wherever there was a harvest. So there would have been one around Passover. Then there would have been another one around Shavuot. Then there would have been another one, for other kinds of fruits and so forth in the fall, around Sukkot. And so it was a constant, every 3 or 4 months they're coming in there, but it was not by a standing army. It was by a coalition of guys. Well, any of you that have ever been around joint duty in the military, you can attest to this fact that you lose some efficiency and so forth by trying to put all these guys together, because we all, different services have different language that we use, different terms that we use, and so it's just not something that I get the point that I'm trying to say is these guys they weren't in uniforms, that again, they were raiders, that had formed an army. They were not an army as such. And so every sword against his fellow possibly meant that it was one contingent, or whatever group that you want to say, a company, a platoon, a regiment, a battalion, whoever it was, against each other. And because they didn't, in the darkness and all that kind of stuff, they didn't really know the person that was confronting him. And plus, I'm sure that when they were getting up out of their sleep, God made them extra groggy, and then when they were turning around, looking at everybody, they kept spinning around until they got all dizzy. No, I made up that last part. All right, they were confused. God certainly confused them, and they started fighting amongst each other. Now, they took off, and they went to these places that we really don't know. Beth Shittah. Yep, there you go, Alan. The fog of war. There you go. They went as far as Beth Shittah and Zerara and the border, Abel Meholah, and by Tabat. So we don't know where these places are today. There's some guesses, some things that they, maybe think that they know where it is, but they really don't. But anyway, it does everyone agrees that they fled in generally a southeastern direction. So once the Midianites then started running and they were in retreat, then they called in all of the other troops, and then got a hold of all of the other surrounding tribes, and they all jumped into the fray. I don't know, and I really don't know how that works, because we look at this stuff and we say, okay, just instantly they were able to jump into this. But no, I mean, it would have taken a little bit of time. So evidently these Midianites, they didn't just go the 30, 36, 38 miles that it would have taken them from the battle site down to across the river to safety with the Amalekites and the rest of Midian. So it must have taken them several days, because they were able then to, with bonfires and shofar blowing and so forth, somehow signal the other tribes, and everybody joined in the fray. So any comments or questions thus far? We've only got 3 more verses here. All right. So Gideon sent messengers throughout all the hill country of Ephraim, saying, "Come down against Midian and seize the waters down to Beth-bara, all along the Jordan." So all the men of Ephraim were summoned and took control of the water side as far as Beth-bara by the Jordan. Then they captured the 2 princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. They slew Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and they slew Zeb at the winepress of Zeb. So they kept pursuing Midian, and they brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon from across the Jordan. So they actually crossed over the Jordan and killed those guys from over there. All right, now here's a picture, a map. You can't get by one of my lessons without a map. All right, so here we are. All of Gideon's troops had gathered up here at Ophrah, and then here they split it from 32,000 down to 10,000. Then they went from there down to Ain Harod, and that's where they went down to the 300 people. And so from there, then they have the battle right up here in that little red circle, and that's when they had come down from this Mount Gilboa. Well, that's if that's where the battle was, and Mount Gilboa is up here, that's still 4 or 5 mile trek from the mountain down there to that. So, just being that much distance, I think the enemy thought, well, we're pretty safe tonight, so they didn't have a lot of troops up and ready to fight. All right, so then they have their battle. Gideon sweeps in with the shofar blowing and the trumpets or the torches, and this guy's totally confused. They're all out of they're crazy. They don't know what to do, so they're just lashing out because it's dark, and they see people shouting and swinging swords around, and of course at that point then you're going to be swinging your own sword around to make sure that you're safe. And so they end up killing a lot of them at that point of each other, and then but it got them on the run. And at that point then they call in the reserves. Then they started calling in all the other countries or all the other tribes to lend support and bring people into the fight. So they've just gone down, and again, we don't know exactly where these villages were or anything like that, but there's some educated guesses as to where they were. All right, now the distance from here where Gideon first encountered the Midianites, the distance from there down here to Beth Barah is about 38 miles. So an army, generally speaking, they can travel, actually, really, if a forced double march, Joshua did 21 miles through the mountains, and that would have been tough. But these guys, they were down on the coastal plain or the plain of the Jordan River there. And okay, I got to use my cursor because you don't know just what I pointed to. Okay, this area right in here, it's flat, relatively flat, easy to traverse, and so even at that, how long is it going to take them? Maybe 2 days, 3 days to go the 38 miles. It may have even taken them longer because with an army and all that kind of stuff, it may have taken them maybe 5 or 6 days to get down there. Well, that was enough time actually to get Ephraim involved, and Manasseh, Naphtali, Zebulun, Asher, all those guys, get them all involved, and to come down here and block off the Midianites, because they could have just kept on going down here, so they were trying to block them off. And at that point, then they went over here. We'll talk about that some more next week as to where those battles are. And but it said they pursued them, and just killing them all along the way. And then over here they have a final battle with Midian. The Midianites then for a number of years ceased to be a serious threat to Israel. So I think I've gone over that. Midian being in full retreat, and then Ephraim they got called late to the game. So and we'll hear more about that next time when we get together. All right, so